Thank you very much. I hope you're all ready for some politics and are interested in the way in which Brexit is going. Thank you very much for inviting me, Groundswell, to help facilitate this session and get us thinking about the way in which Brexit is going to affect our businesses and our environment in the future. It's very welcome. I know a lot of people are here to talk about the practicalities, and it's fantastic for me to be able to talk about that as well. Most of my life is politics, and it's very dull, so it's great to be getting out. But we also obviously do need to think about what is going to happen with Brexit. And this obviously isn't to talk about whether Brexit's a good thing or a bad thing. I think all of us in this room would want Brexit to be a good thing for farmers, or the Brexit to be a good one for the farming community, farm businesses, and for consumers, and for the environment. I imagine we're all feeling that is what we want, a sort of Brexit that's good for that. I was just going to touch on a few aspects of Brexit just to set the scene and then ask these wonderful farmers to give some of their thoughts about how it might be affecting them and what they're thinking about, where it needs to go and what Gove needs to do. There are 9 bills ahead of us. One actually just went through yesterday, the withdrawal bill, which many of you will be aware, got royal assent yesterday, and that sets out how we're dismantling the current membership of EU by leaving that act behind and incorporating the European regulations into our own regulations and setting out how we do that. But there's so many questions around how that's going to work, how legitimate some of that transcribing of the regulations and laws are going to work in the UK, because there's so many ways in which you can't just do a straight cut and paste. But that bill has now got royal assent, but we have 8 bills ahead of us that a lot of them are going to affect us significantly. I'm not going to go through all of them, but obviously the biggest thing that you'll all be thinking about is the deal that we have with Europe, the way in which the market will or will not be open, the way in which our regulatory framework will be affected, or it'll be the same, or for how long. The deal with Europe is obviously top of the list of concerns, and how it's going to affect inputs as well, what we're inputting from, as well as our exports and the imports that we'll be competing with. But the next probably biggie is the agricultural bill, which we're expecting in the next few weeks. The first draft is expected before the MPs go into recess, and that will lay out at a very top level process, a very top level framework, how we will be implementing agricultural support and agricultural regulations and all the things that go with it in the UK once we leave the European Union, and what the transition phase will look like. But a lot of it will come later. It won't actually be in the bill. It'll be the wrangling around the way in which the bill is implemented through statutory instruments and regulations and those kind of things. But the key thing is, how is it going to implement the public money for public goods approach that Michael Gove has outlined very strongly over the last year, and that will be probably something we want to talk about here. What does the environmental land management system look like? DEFRA have had workshops exploring what that looks like, probably with farming groups, certainly with conservation groups, with advisory groups over the last few weeks. And the nature of that scheme is beginning to emerge, but it's still very much open for grabs. Just quickly going through the other areas that Brexit affects. Obviously the trade bill, that is quite a narrow focus, the trade bill coming through. The more important trade thing will be the deals that we do once we leave the European Union. And a lot of those deals are already being talked about with the US, with India, with Korea, with Australia. So Liam Fox, if anybody saw the map of his journeys over the last 2 years, it was extraordinary. He's been flying all around the globe. I mean, literally, I could not do that myself. It would just kill me. But going on those flights all around the world to talk the new relationship of the UK with those individual countries and regions. And a lot of it's about many other things. But as you'd have seen, a lot of it is also, some of it is discussing food standards, food trade, and there's a huge amount of concern about what that really means for farmers here, and our standards and our ability to trade globally and our ability to compete with farmers producing to different standards than we have here. And my organisation, which I should have introduced myself actually, is I run the farm campaign at Sustain, which is an alliance of about 100 non-governmental organisations, academic institutes, all with some concern around food and farming. So I can talk about that more if you want. But we've got a big concern about all these areas, and we also cover fisheries. But the trade work, we've been doing a lot of work to try and maintain the public interest and public concern around the potential for reducing environmental, animal welfare, food safety, food labelling, all those kit and caboodle around our food system, those standards. And we've been doing a lot of work with the media to try and keep that pressure up to make sure Liam Fox doesn't do a deal which really undermines UK farmers and UK standards and UK environment. So the trade deal's absolutely crucial. So that's nearly at the end of my list. I mean, obviously, as an hour to talk about Brexit is a bit crazy, but let's try. Obviously, labour, availability of labour and labour constraints. And I know Minette Battus was in number 10 yesterday. I don't know if any of you saw her photograph coming out of number 10. And she actually talked about, the need for a new seasonal worker scheme. And that is crucial, but also your ability to treat and pay workers well does depend very much on the supply chain, the prices you're getting, the deal you're getting, the supply chain. So that's my final point. Amongst all those things around Brexit, you've still got an incredibly concentrated and increasingly concentrated marketplace. You've got Sainsbury's merging with Asda, you've got Amazon coming in, really coming in hard, trying to buy up one of the big high street retailers. What's that going to do to your prices? And in the context of whether you've got a decent environmental land management scheme to pay for the goods that you're providing to the public, as opposed to the goods you're providing privately. So it's all very complicated, but we mustn't forget that marketplace is absolutely crucial to regulate properly so it treats farmers fairly, so you can treat the land and your workers and the animals fairly. For me, that's absolutely crucial. It's a piece of work I've been working on for some time, and I'm working on the Sainsbury's Asda merger. I think, one of the things we've got here is the grocery code adjudicator, and it's unique in the world, and how that and wider regulation responds to all these pressures is crucial. So that was a bit of a very, very rapid and probably incredibly incomplete state of play, little sweep through the issues around Brexit. What I wanted to just quickly ask, is there anybody in the room with a burning issue that they want to make sure that we do cover in this session? And then I'll go on to the farmers to ask them for... Do we have other mics in the room, or have we just got the two? Okay, thank you.
The burning issue I've got is that we used to make 169,000 tractors per annum.
All right.
And in the industrial strategy, the new industrial strategy, there are none.
Right.
And we import all the components from Europe. Have we gone completely mad?
Very good question. So availability of components and machinery that we need as we embrace a new way of farming, absolutely crucial. Interesting to see the little robot company and obviously other machinery in the room. We will hopefully be able to cover that. Anybody else before we ask our farmers to give their thoughts? Great. We'll get on to questions afterwards then, and so do start thinking about what you might want to ask of me. I have some knowledge, but also our farmers, to start a conversation going. Thank you. Would you like to go? Who would like to go first?
Thank you very much, Vicki. So for those who don't know me, I'm Tom Bradshaw. Farming in Essex, a small family farming partnership in partnership with my parents and my wife. And we contract farm about 1,250 hectares for 6 neighbouring farmers. I wouldn't describe myself as a purist direct driller, but we're probably direct drilling about 60 or 70% of the area we farm. But we tend to describe ourselves as targeted cultivation rather than absolutely direct drilling. Just for the people we're working for and things like that, it seems to work pretty well. We're growing a range of combinable crops, a few acres of sugar beet, and anything that will go through a combine we've probably had a go at growing. I guess probably the reason I'm here today is that I'm chairman of the NFU Combinable Crops Board, I was elected about 3 months ago. So we've obviously been putting a huge amount of thought into the whole Brexit issue. We try and carry on with the day job, but really Brexit is dominating a lot of our thoughts at the moment, as you can imagine. And I guess we have to come up with some sort of strategy to get our sector, the combinable cropping sector, and the whole farming sector recognised by government. Because at the moment, we hear a lot about public goods. We hear a lot about the importance of the city and the financial services industry and the importance of making sure that we have a trade deal that suits them. But I also think we don't hear enough about agriculture and the role of farming in making sure, underpinning society and providing food for our nation. So I guess our job really is about how we can raise the profile of farming up the agenda and make sure that when these trade deals are being put together, that farming is recognised for and agriculture is recognised for what we do deliver to society. And we've recently launched our campaign, which is the hashtag Your Harvest. And really, it's a campaign to try and get the whole industry involved, certainly the whole arable industry involved, to get our MPs out on farm over the summer period when they've probably got a little bit more time on their hands. They're not in London. They normally return to their constituencies. And just to get them out in front of the combine, in the combine, working, and so they can understand exactly what is going on during that period of time. I mean, the UK is producing 11 million loaves of bread a day, and over 85% of that cereals is coming from us as arable growers. So society is hugely dependent on us as the cornerstone, producing all this feed so that they can carry on with their day jobs and not having to worry about food security. And from that point of view, the trade deal, you mentioned about sort of third-party trade deals, Vicki. The first and most important has got to be the trade deal with Europe. With 600 million people on our doorstep, we need a trade deal which enables a free and frictionless trade with the EU as our first port of call. And anything which moves away from that, I think, is going to be incredibly worrying. We look at where our cereal exports go when we are exporting, and a lot of it goes down to Spain. So the cereal sector itself is reasonably reliant on that EU market. But then also lamb exports into Europe are incredibly important. And so the EU market there is going to be very, very important. But I guess what concerns us more is some of the third country trade agreements that you mentioned, particularly the US. And this isn't about chlorinated chicken, but this is about the standards which food is produced to. And we've come up with this term of equivalence payments. And food itself is not a public good, and we understand that. But where we have higher standards in this country, and that can be, we don't have access to GM. The only reason we don't have access to GM is because of a perceived public or environmental good. That increases our cost of production, and yet we still import 3 million tonnes of GM soybeans into this country every year, which undermines our internal protein marketplace. So we're not allowed to use the technology, but we're handicapped by not having access to it, and our markets don't reflect the true cost of production. So somewhere down the line, I think there needs to be support for our systems where we don't have access to these technologies, and we could use growth hormones, we could put chlorinated chicken in the same bracket. Where we don't have access to that technology, there's an increased cost in the production of food, and the technology barrier that increases that cost, there is a public good in that element. So I think that one of the things we need to be doing as the industry is saying, look, we need to be on a level playing field. Where we're not on a level playing field, there has to be some compensation for the fact that we are not on that level playing field. And that's one of the things that we're being very vocal about within our crops board. Soils obviously had a huge amount of focus. And over the last 10 years, it's become very in vogue, and it's something now which is talked about an incredible amount by the whole of the farming community. And I think we know that it's the bedrock of what we do. As farmers, we're custodians of the land for our generation, and we have a responsibility to make sure we do take care of our soils and hand it over in a better condition than when we inherit it. So I think the focus on soils is long overdue, and probably it's what sparks this event really, is the whole focus on soil and how we manage our soils going forwards. I do have a fear about government policy getting involved with soil management, and soil is incredibly complex. None of us here really understand the way our soils works, but we have probably a greater understanding than those that are going to be making policy in London. And if we oversimplify soil, I have a big fear that it could be to the detriment of the long-term management of our soil. If we encourage people to go into no-till or min-till because we think that's cool and that's in vogue and that's going to look after our soil, if people's brains don't shift as they go towards that payment, then unfortunately it will reduce productivity. There's a huge understanding that goes with moving towards no-till and min-till, that cannot be, it's not something that you learn overnight. So I think that incentivising a move towards no-till and min-till could be to the detriment of productivity, and in the long term it could be to the detriment of no-till, because it's better a gradual uptake and by people who are really passionate about it and really understand it, rather than following government pennies because they think it's the right place to go. So I'm a little bit nervous about the government involvement in soil and just the fact that they could oversimplify it. We also talk about environmental land management schemes, and we all know that there's an absolute disaster going on at the moment in Whitehall, and the delivery system is just, it's disgraceful. If you sign a contract with government, you expect to receive your money when you're supposed to receive your money, and at the moment it's just not happening. And we've taken Michael Gove to task on this. He understands the difficulties and he accepts that it's not good enough. But I think when we have a new environmental land management scheme, we do need simplicity. It has to deliver public goods, and I'm a massive supporter of that. It has to be profitable. Income forgone does not work when we're looking at land management schemes. We need a profitable environmental scheme that works for society, works for farming, and therefore works for government. And I think they would be the key messages that I have there. And then finally, I think that as an industry, we are very, very diverse. We have multiple different systems, and that's just in the arable sector without going wider than that. But I think it's incredibly important that we stand united at the moment, that we're all trying to recognise the importance of food production. Our job is to produce wholesome, affordable food. There are multiple ways of doing that, but if we can have one message going to government about the importance of the agricultural sector, I think it's much easier than being divided. And I think that's the message that certainly Michael Gove got from the Health and Harmony response, and he seems to have changed on the back of it. And it seems likely there won't be a hard cap now because of the industry standing united together. And that's what I'd like to see, is us all fighting for our corner, but making sure that our messages to government are clear about food production being the core of what we do.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. I forgot to mention the cap. What will happen next with the payments in the transition is absolutely crucial, obviously, and what they finally decide on. So if Angus will now speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Tom. Angus Gowthorpe. I farm up near York, just over 400 acres, primarily arable, but also with a pedigree beef herd. I've been no-tilling conservation agriculture for 5 years now, and I suppose one of the reasons I'm stood here now is I was awarded runner-up in the Soil Farmer of the Year competition this year. Fully backing what Tom and Vicky say about the trade deals and things, my sort of focus with my background really is on soils. So I'd like to see there be far more support for cover crops and no-till within the agricultural policy going forwards, particularly the relationship between cover crops, no-till and the wider environment and wildlife. At home we're seeing a far more diverse bird and mammal species mix on the farm through no other change but through managing our soils better, through running cover crops and green crops throughout the 365 days of the year. Greater carbon sequestration, we're getting through the cover crops and through having living roots all year round. Whilst I recognise that, particularly when government have talked about measuring organic matter, the scientists can't agree how to consistently measure organic matter, so there's no way whatsoever that government can do it within policy. So however, if they are going to measure something and pay us accordingly, it's going to be very difficult for them to come up with a way to do that. It'll be interesting to see what they do propose. We need equal production regulations for pesticides, veterinary products, animal health and welfare as our competitors both within the EU and worldwide. We must not be exporting our environmental conscience just for trade deals. Finally, I'd like to see a far greater reduction in red tape, because the red tape at the moment is horrendous, and that is one of the reasons why the stewardship just is not being taken up. I've looked at it, I've been offered it. There are so many hoops to jump through, so many places you can trip up on just the slightest data recording issues, and you're losing your payments. It's just not worth the risk. And finally, on labelling of produce, red tractor is great, but we need UK production labelling, not just red tractor. We need UK production labelling, and it needs to be enforced.
Thank you very much. Well, lots of different themes coming up there. For me, I think your point about farmers being united and speaking about what they're doing, making it clear with consumers the role of food in our lives, although it's never been cheaper, is obviously fundamental. And it's quite distressing when you hear about a lot of talks going on and they're not talking about food at all, except in the context of how can we have the lowest standards, or how can we make sure we open markets in order to facilitate the financial sector or the car manufacturing sector. Not doing that so well at the moment anyway, but I think that united, and how do we give farmers a voice, a better voice, and I think your suggestion about getting MPs on farms is absolutely crucial. What I would hope is that when you do have them on your farm, you talk about the farm, but you actually talk about that deal and ask them to write to Liam Fox or meet with Liam Fox and tell him what they want, tell him what you want and that customers want as well. All the polls are absolutely clear that consumers want to maintain the standards and want to support UK farmers. So MPs should be translating that in their discussions with Liam Fox, who is the International Trade Minister, in case I should have said, sorry, in case anybody didn't know. So there's that. There's also the issue of how the, I think, simplicity in the environmental scheme. A lot of talk, I think, has over the last year, that I've been to a lot of meetings about what the new scheme could look like, what people want from it, all the different groups, and farming groups and conservation groups. And there's there's a call for simplicity, which is absolutely clear, and for getting it right, because the current scheme has clearly not got it right. The number of stewardship applications, I think, has plummeted. The latest figures came out yesterday. It's absolutely plummeted, which is catastrophic, because that would really mean things are going backward if farmers are just going to not do what they've been doing for some time. Good stuff with the soil in particular, but also biodiversity. But the key thing is people are talking about whether it's prescription or outcome-based. And I just wanted to ask everybody in the room to put, if you don't mind doing a show of hands, if you would prefer it to be, I don't know, you might not want to do this, but I just thought it would be quite interesting to see if you prefer to have a scheme which it's entirely about you recording, and there could be spot checks to check you're being honest, recording outcomes like soil carbon, like biodiversity and wildlife, like water quality, so we would go on that. And the other option, which I'll ask you to vote on with your hands after that, is that it's prescription-based. So it is more like the current scheme, but simplified, telling you what you need to do, when to cut, what to do, but you don't have to measure the outcomes. It's assumed that by doing those techniques, you will have those outcomes. So can I have a show of hands for outcome-based? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, okay, 10. And prescription-based? That's interesting. That's actually more prescription. I mean, what I've heard people saying is we want a mix of both. And that's difficult. I can see that might be difficult. Well, it would be interesting to explore. Did you want to comment on that?
Well, yeah, I think the danger of having an outcome-based scheme is that if the weather doesn't play ball, so we've seen butterfly numbers down this year, but a lot of that's down to the incredibly late wet spring. So that was one of the big challenges they have there. So I'm fearful of an outcome-based scheme because there's things outside our control. But I do think maybe within higher environmental schemes, that's where the outcome-based might fit. Yeah. So at the basic level, where we're trying to have maximum buy-in from everybody, we could have a prescription-based model, and then it might be at the higher levels that you go for something which is more outcome-based.
That's interesting. Do you have any thoughts on that? Okay. Interesting. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. I mean, the idea of simplicity is always difficult when you're talking about so many different things. So the other aspect of it is whether you'd be working at a landscape scale, catchment scale, or landscape if you're not talking about particular water catchments, and how much you'd want to work just within the farming community or wider, wider governance. Would you want Natural England and local community spokesmen, the parish council involved in thinking about what the targets are for your area? That's one thing that's come up as well. But anyway, I'm going to open it to you to ask any questions now, if you want to ask any questions about Brexit or make a comment. But keep it relatively short because we haven't got that long. And we've got a mic. Please use a mic. And if you want to say who you are and what you farm or where you come from, that would be great. Thank you.
Hello, yeah. Is this on? I'll show my face because I used to work for Natural England until I retired last year.
Okay.
And I was one of the people that designed those schemes.
Brave man. Thank you.
Against an agenda which was impossible to fulfil, of course. When the permanent secretary said, we want zero disallowance this time around, that was sort of carte blanche for the RPA to say, God, right, okay, we're not letting anything through then that poses any risk whatsoever. So I just want to say, if anybody wants to talk to me about how you might design a scheme, I'd be very interested to give you my experiences about prescriptions, flexibility, trying to build outcomes in, which we tried to do very hard. There are pros and cons. My personal view is that we should move much more towards paying for outcomes. The NFU has always been wary of paying for outcomes because, quite understandably, some of it's out of your control. But I think you can, to some extent, pay for a mixture of you delivering the right habitat. The outcomes may or may not appear. If they don't appear, I think that can be moderated across the years. If you spend 10 years blaming the weather, that's not very credible. 1 year, 2 years, maybe. So that's all I'd like to say.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That's useful. What was your name again? Sorry.
My name's Steve Peel.
Steve Peel. Oh, Steve Peel. Sorry, yes, you wrote a very interesting blog about this. Yes, very, very useful to read that. So, gentlemen.
Stephen Jacobs, Organic Farmers and Growers, agree with everything that you've all been saying. One of the things that I think is really important for everybody in food and farming is to engage with the people that buy the product. And I am very supportive of the Back British Farming campaign. I do talks, and I don't always talk to farmers, which is a refreshing change, don't get me wrong. But I did a talk in London to 50 people who work in the City of London. And when I said to them, what motivates your meal choice, they looked at me a bit puzzled. And it would be recipes. That's what motivated their meal choice, whether it was an ethnic recipe or it was something that they saw as fashionable. When I said, do you buy British? They said, why? So I think there is a huge need, and I understand, I was talking to Guy Smith at Cereals last week, it's hugely resource hungry for us to get into the urban centres to talk to people about why it's fundamental that we back British. But we're not, I don't think we're succeeding, and I think it's good to get MPs to farms, but getting MPs to listen to their voters, which is something Vicki's very good at doing, and therefore we need to get people who vote to understand what's at stake.
Very, very good points. It's interesting because it's about farmers as doing marketing, understanding their market more. And I think the transition and the support the government could give, I would like to see the government making sure farmers had access to the right kind of training and mentoring and advice and farmer-to-farmer peer support in understanding their market better and accessing it more directly, preferably, particularly livestock, high-value crops as well, but all crops. Anyway, any more questions or points? Sorry, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just echoing comments. Thank you very much for this today. Regarding sort of measurable outcomes, putting Stephen Briggs over there on the spotlight, talked to him in the past about measurable outcomes, particularly soil organic matter. Well, that varies according to which day of the week you measure it and how you measure it and who you send to sample it and how good they are at sampling. So that is my concern with that. But prescriptive-wise, we know what's good for soil organic matter, what's good for soil health. Is that not good enough? I appreciate they need measurable outcomes. Just a second one, we're part of a large farming cluster, and we were able to get Sarah Church James Phillips and people from fairly senior up in DEFRA and National England down to us because we were part of the farming cluster to actually give a bit of input into what is hopefully future policy, whether we've made any change or not. But I would urge anyone to collaborate as much as possible. Farmer clusters are going to be a good way of working together to hopefully achieve what they want.
Angus,
Finally, one quick question.
Thanks.
Glyphosate. Never mind what policy happens. Could someone tell me what the practical measures are you aware, as far as you're aware, for renewal of glyphosate, whatever happens, whether we have the nuclear option of no deal, or what happens next?
Okay, do you want to answer that, and then if you could talk about the soil measure?
I think the glyphosate one is, we know where we are at the moment. We've got another 4 years now. So we've got a 5-year renewal, which I think at the time we were all disappointed about. The evidence behind it should have been a 15-year renewal. So the difficulty now is that UK government backed it, absolutely. They were very, very supportive of glyphosate, and Michael Gove is regularly now, even earlier this week, he's again referenced glyphosate and how important it is for no-till and for that sort of thing. I think we have got a concern about the way we use glyphosate and the reliance that we have on glyphosate. And so at the moment, I think that we probably have to, the re-registration is political, and yes, we will influence that as much as we can. But we also have a responsibility amongst ourselves to make sure that we're using it correctly, and that also we manage all of our resistance sort of areas as well as we possibly can. And I think the challenge we have in no-till is that if you read the resistance management guidelines, cultivation is a key part of resistance management. And so if there's a sector which is going to fall down first, it's likely to be no-till. And so I think that for the majority of people in this room, the big challenge is how we manage glyphosate resistance going forwards. And it's something we all have to be incredibly mindful of. And it may be that there are occasions where a very shallow cultivation is something that it can be very useful to sort of make sure we have access to the product going forwards.
Tom, we won't be able to diverge from the European standards if we still want to access the European market.
Well, I would ask about the 60 million tonnes of GM that's imported into the EU every year, which will all be treated with glyphosate, and it's still imported every year. So we have to question here. The EU have been very good at protecting the marketplace where they want to. And I'm sure that they will stand up and say, hang on, you've got a product registered here that isn't registered in the UK. MRLs still exist, but I'm actually of the view, when we look at things like neonicotinoids, now they've gone now, and I'm quite happy not happy, but we accept that they've gone, but we're still going to import millions of tonnes every year that are used growing them. And all we're doing then is exporting our environmental conscience or our environmental impact to other parts of the world, and that simply is not good enough. If Michael Gove wants to make a difference, and if he wants to be the green sort of guru that he's been talking about, and if that is his role, then he has to make sure that our imports are not utilising products that we have banned in this country because of either human health reasons or environmental concerns. And that's the challenge to government is, if you're going to stop us using these products, stop imports that have been grown using these identical products. And MRLs are no good, because they'll fall way below MRLs, but it's actually the use of the product which is the challenge.
Yeah, just going back to glyphosate, obviously for no-till it's a vital tool in the box. Through careful management, personally, we're only using 1 dose in any 12-month growing season and not using any pre-harvest at all. Some people would say, well, they can do it in the States without glyphosate. That's great. They've got very different weather, very different crops that they grow, and they can do it. But here we're told by all the cover crop gurus, grow a diverse mix of cover crops, which is primary reason you're going to use glyphosate. The only time to use a crimping roller is when the plant is at anthesis. Through growing a diverse mix, the plants aren't all at anthesis at the same time, so you don't get a full kill when you crimp roll. So I fully support the glyphosate stewardship package that's being put together at the moment, and with correct use, I don't see how it can be a problem.
Okay, next question.
Hello, Daniel Brown. I'm a small-scale arable producer and medium-scale free-range egg producer. And just to feed into the last 2 points, in the egg industry, we've got the BEIC Lion Code, which acts as a sort of a benign dictator, really, and we as egg farmers sign up to it. And it's been brilliant in getting recipes across to the public, advertising campaigns, and it's a focal point to lobby MPs, not always successfully. And the thing is with that is you need all the farmers on board. It's expensive. You've got to keep paying. You need good professional media relations. And even then, you'll probably get one good story about how eggs can be eaten a lot and they're not bad for cholesterol, not bad for your heart. And then the next day, the Daily Mail does an expose on some chicken farmer who's been caught out because his staff didn't pick the deads up. It's a constant battle. It's an expensive battle. And you've all got to be on the same page. Whereas I think in the arable industry, it's a bit more like herding cats. Farmers perhaps are less unified behind one voice. But that's just me rambling on. My point is to Tom, to pick up on something he said about imported soya. In the free-range egg industry, we were basically the last to capitulate on non-GM, and the capitulation was because we just couldn't get it. And we had to say to the retailers, we can't get it, you're going to have to let us use GM. And if some kind of tariff comes in to protect the arable farmers in the UK, it's probably going to affect the livestock farmers in that they can't get non-GM, or if they can, it's at huge cost. So have you got any further thoughts on how you might structure something like that, how you'd go forward with it?
Yeah, realistically, I think tariffs are not an option. I don't see us arguing for any tariffs successfully, even if we decided that that was the way we'd like to approach things. I actually see this much more as an argument for continued support from government for the fact we don't have access to that technology. And so I don't see stopping of imports. We understand how crucial they are, and actually your sector is so crucial to our sector that the last thing we'd want to do is make chicken production or egg production unprofitable, because the whole relationship is symbiotic, isn't it? I think chickens are using something like 6 to 7 million tonnes a year now of UK produce. So it's incredibly important to us. But I do think that where we don't have that technology because of a deemed public or environmental good, there is an argument for direct support to compensate for the increased cost of production. So that's the way I see that support being delivered, and it's not. I don't at all see tariffs coming in. But I think also we would like to see where we see equivalent standards of it, sort of on imports. The last thing that the chicken sector would really want is imports of chlorinated chicken from the US. And so that difference in production standards, again, it's very difficult under WTO. The reality is that that'll be deemed to be the same production standard. And so what we heard earlier on about engaging with our consumer, I think it is incredibly important to try and make sure that the British public understand the way we produce food, why we produce it that way, and let's hope they support us for producing it the way we do.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kathleen Keller here, and I'm here from DEFRA, and I work on environmentally friendly farming issues. So I would be absolutely delighted if anyone wanted to come up to me and tell me about their experiences with no-till, direct-till, and any of the other innovative methods you're using, because we are in dialogue. We are trying to understand how these can benefit our producers as we go forward and we leave the European Union. The other comment I wanted to make is DEFRA supports LEAF, and LEAF supports Open Farm Sunday. And I haven't seen the final figures for this year, but last year, 275,000 people visited hundreds of farms across this country. Michael Gove made a real effort to get out on farms, and George Eustace, because not just because they wanted to see, but to be seen and to encourage other people to go. And as a personal experience, it was my first time on an Open Farm Sunday. I brought my husband along. He's not been on a working farm for years, and his comment was, well, how come nobody told me about it? This is brilliant. So I really do advise people to get involved and to get talking to your consumers through Open Farm Sunday. Thank you.
Can you just repeat your name, just if people want to?
I'm Kathleen Kelleher. I work for DEFRA, and I work on environmentally friendly farming. Okay?
Can I ask, is anybody else from DEFRA here? Is Alice? Oh, anybody else from DEFRA? Is that over there? Just wanted to point out, if that's okay, you can speak to Is that Alice over there? Hi. Sorry, next question.
Good morning. Philip Vickers, Director of Aztec Ag Crop Consultancy. I have a question for you regarding research going forward, because there's so much money coming to the British research establishments from Europe. What's your thoughts on the government's willingness and ability to continue with the research, because we're heading into a brave new world, environmental schemes, conservation ag, and every time I go looking for research, it's part of a 5-year scheme that we're 2 years into. So I'd just like your feeling on how we're going to progress, on the research side.
Well, I'll comment, and the others probably want to comment on this as well. I think there's an awful lot of rhetoric spoken about research and the, how much ministers want it, and the industrial strategy covering new food and drink council research, and there's a lot of money going into research, but whether it's into the kind of research you need and that you're talking about, I do worry, and I've worried about that for a long time, and we've been calling for a specific allocation of farmer-led research, actually allocate a specific target. And I think Soil Association, who run their Innovation Farmers Network, they call for, I think it's 7%, does anybody remember? Anyway, they're saying 7% of all the farm research budget should go to farmers. And I think that is really important, that it's kind of farmer-led and farmer-understood and farmer-translated to other farmers. So in the whole package, we've got to get it right going forward, because we've got a completely new world. And one other thing I'd say about research is that I see an awful lot of polarized debates, about veganism, about livestock, or about soil carbon, because people are basing their arguments on something they read that actually is based on US figures, or Southern European figures, or Australian figures. We really need to know what we're doing here, and I think there is a lot of good institutions doing work, but it doesn't seem to get out. The ones that get out are the big institutions from America, and it's so different here. We have to be context-specific and even field-specific, let alone farm-specific. I totally recognise that. So we need to be banging on about that to Michael Gove as well. I don't know if you want to say anything about research. Do you have enough access to research?
I get bits from a certain agronomist that's in the room. For me, the key thing is knowledge transfer. A lot of the work that's going on, research into cover crops, nutrition instead of fungicides, it's all been done on farm. It's all been done by farmers. The universities and other research establishments, they're racing to catch us, the farmers, up, because they're so behind the curve at the moment. I would like to see, whether it be AHDB or other, I would like to see a lot of this research be involved with the Monitor Farm network, with AHDB, or if something else needed to be set up, so be it. But that's my view. But yeah, I likewise have a lot of concerns over where the money is going to come from once the EU pot diminishes.
Any other questions?
Just last week, we were very lucky to, I think we had an announcement from DEFRA and Michael Gove that another £4.5 million has been put into crop research, which has gone to 3 of the institutions. And we are delighted to see that, but it's not just about money. It's about how that money is used and where it's targeted. And that is the fear that blue sky research is great, but actually I think it should all be judged by the impact it has on productivity at a farm level, because then it brings it back to reality. This is how we're influencing production and increasing productivity, which is the big challenge that we have. So I think that's some of the metrics when we're looking at the success of research should be about how it affects the grassroots farmer.
Hello, my name is Nick Ray, I'm from Friends of the Earth. We recognise a lot of the benefits of conservation agriculture and no-till, both in terms of delivering public goods, the environmental public goods, and also in terms of farm profitability. I wonder if I hear you warning against a headlong rush into an obsession with soils, but I wonder if you think there's a right way. Do you have a prescription for the way no-till or conservation agriculture could be encouraged, perhaps through transition payments or something similar?
I think that the challenge I have, so we've been doing this now for 5-6 years, no-till, and we've had some great successes, we've had some terrible failures. And there is no one prescription which works on every farm, on every soil type, in every rotation. And that is the challenge that, at a practical farm level, every farm is different. And the soil types are different. The rainfall is very different in Essex to what it is in Northumberland, what it is in Cornwall. And so to come up with a prescription is incredibly challenging. And that's my fear, is that we come up with a prescription which might work on my farm, but it might not work on those other two regions that I have just said. And so a pick list where you can pick and choose some of the prescriptions that we know are likely to increase or improve soil health or protect our watercourses. I see that as being the best way forward, so that every farmer can look at it, every advisor can look at it and say, well, actually, for this person's farm, these are the options that are most suitable. And then once you get to the bottom of that pick list, you see what your payment would be per hectare, rather than just having a flat rate per hectare because you've adopted no-till. So that's my gut feel as to the way to try and develop a system which gives maximum flexibility, but also we know that the prescriptions on that pick list have an outcome which is driven the decision in the first place.
Yeah, likewise, just say that there's absolutely no blueprint for no-till on any one farm. Every farm's different, cropping, land types and everything else. I go onto quite a lot of farms contracting, direct drilling for people. Unfortunately, at the moment, that primarily is due to blackgrass, so they're wanting minimum disturbance drilling, which is great as a way forwards. But when I start talking to them about soil health, got to realise that we're trying to get over 70 years of addiction to steel. That's how Grandad did it, that's how Dad did it. That takes some getting over, payments or otherwise. The fear of waving a big carrot of pound notes will be that people, as we've said before, people dive into it, find it's not for them, and then you get the kickback. Really, it's something that people need and desire to want to do for other reasons, whether that be their own environment, their own soil health, water quality, whatever, and then go out and get themselves the knowledge. And that again comes down to whether it be AHDB, knowledge transfer, monitor farms, where people have been doing it, like Tom and myself, for 6-7 years, and they can get that reassurance, it does work. You don't need to mess about with the soil. It does work. You don't get a yield drop, you actually get a yield increase. At the moment, there's fields of wheat around us at home on blowaway sand, they're dead. I'm on just the same land, my wheat is still alive, and that is through soil biology and organic matter.
Can I ask you a quick question before we go on to the other question? Would you be in favour of a whole farm plan approach under the new scheme? So you have the whole farm under the scheme, and you pick bits from the contract that you want to do, as you described, but it would be looking at the whole farm. You'd have to report on the whole farm.
To me, that makes sense. And so at the moment, we see our support payments in sort of as our direct support, and then our environmental separately. Whereas I think if we had a whole farm approach that encompassed everything, and you could have a suite which is for protection of watercourses, you could have a suite which is for encouraging pollinators, and all different sort of options that you pick and choose what suits your farm. I'm not that, to me that sounds sensible. It's just the complexity of it that worries me. And what we have seen is that simplicity is key. If we go back to the old ELS schemes, they had huge uptake, and across a landscape, there was a large amount of land that was put into those schemes because they were simple to use and simple to work. And so there's a balance between having a whole farm approach and a simplistic approach.
Yeah. Angus, would you like a whole farm?
Yeah, as Tom says, I think the whole farm view would be great, but incorporate that within an easy to manage stewardship system on the farm, so that you could cherry pick the bits that were relevant. Very much like the old ELS, really.
Brief about the ELS. We have another.
Yes, hello.
You had from Tom will keep me right, but from memory it was 75% uptake in the UK, whereas you're looking about 7% at the moment with the new stewardship schemes. I think that says it all, really.
But I'm afraid we can only blame the prescriptions for that.
Something to talk about over lunch. This gentleman and then that lady at the back.
I'm the managing director of a company which creates farm tractors for the innovative no-till farming system, as well as farm transportation. That's what I do, and I've done it for 44 years. I want you to know that in the Parliament, the same mistake that the second speaker made was made by Michael Gove MP in the Houses of Parliament. And what he said was, this is the min-till and no-till show. It's not the min-till show at all. This is a no-till show, as the Cherries will explain to you. And you please have got to try to understand during this time that there is a very, very big difference between the two.
Sorry, I was actually referencing Michael Gove. I know the absolute difference, but he has categorized the two together. We know that that's wrong, but that is what he is doing.
I'm sure he has. Okay, we've got one more question.
Okay, very quickly, I'm sorry the discussion's moved on from where we were. It was a comment about knowledge transfer and research. And I think the comment was about, universities looking at research and then farmers looking at research on their farms, because I know sometimes the seeds of ideas are formed on farm and you want to trial it out. But somewhere in between, I want to point out that the Agricultural Industries Confederation, and I represent the crop protection sector there, does £11 million worth of research each year on crop protection issues, specifically amongst our members. So that's looking at holistic approaches to use of not just crop protection products, but also different varieties across different soil types using different cultivation techniques, also looking at cover crops as well. And it's not always that the solution does come out of a can, it's also that it comes from different cultivation techniques, varieties and cover crops. So be aware of that, and also attached to that there are 700 agronomists employed by those members who are on farm every day, given that knowledge transfer to farmers. So there is a place in between for that, and it is happening.
Okay, thank you. I was going to ask, have we got time for a last comment by our speakers? If you have a final comment on the Brexit particularly, what should happen next?
I guess when we come back to Brexit, my nervousness is that we've seen no progress over the last 15, 16 months. We really are no further forward in terms of sort of having any visibility of what a deal is going to look like. We desperately need clarity. The crop we're about to harvest will be sold post-Brexit, and we're making investment decisions which are 5 to 8 year decisions, and we do need we need clarity about where we're going to be heading, because at the moment we're in this sort of grey area where people don't want to invest because they're uncertain for the future.
Yeah, likewise, clarity is needed. Looking forward to seeing what the document says later this month or in July. Personally, I like the way that Gove is looking at things green-wise, but I think he'll be reined in one way or another.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the speakers, Tom and Angus, and you for coming. We have another session tomorrow, which is called Politics of Food, which might drill more down into some of the issues that came out, like GM and pesticides, and more long-standing things, not necessarily to do with Brexit, so do come to that. And I ask you to give a round of applause to my speakers. Thank you very much.